The night it all began, she stood 60 floors above the city, rain streaking down the glass like tears she could no longer shed behind her. The sound of the door unlocking, a sound she'd come to fear and crave in equal measure. Antonio Russo had returned early, her husband. Her captor. The man who once said, "You're just my wife on paper." But tonight, the game changed. Point one command: pack a bag. We leave in an hour. And Sophia's life would spiral into a world of luxury, danger, and a love she was never meant to feel. Because sometimes the deadliest vows aren't written in ink, but in blood and desire. Before we begin, if you believe that even the darkest hearts can learn to love, make sure to subscribe. It's free and helps us share more unforgettable stories from Desire Tales. The rain drummed against the window like impatient fingers, matching the rhythm of my racing heart. My reflection stared back at me from the smudged glass, pale face, hollow eyes, hair pulled back in a messy bun that had once been neat. I barely recognized myself anymore. Just another ghost haunting the penthouse of the Bellini Tower, the most exclusive address in the city. 3 weeks, that's how long I'd been Mrs. Russo. 3 weeks since I'd signed my life away in an austere courthouse ceremony. With no guests, no flowers, and definitely no love. Just a mountain of debt vanishing with the stroke of a pen and the cold press of a platinum band around my finger. You're just my wife on paper. His words still echoed in my ears, delivered with such casual cruelty on our wedding night, as he straightened his tie and walked out the door without a backward glance, leaving me alone in this gilded cage with its marble floors, designer furniture, and empty, echoing rooms. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, watching raindrops race down the pane. 60 floors below, the city lights blurred into a kaleidoscope of colors through my tears. I'd agreed to this arrangement out of desperation. To save my father, to protect my little sister, and now I was trapped, bound to a man whose true nature I was only beginning to understand. Then came the sudden click of the front door lock. The sound sent ice through my veins. I froze, fingers splayed against the glass, breath caught in my throat. He wasn't supposed to be back tonight. His business, whatever that truly entailed, had taken him to Miami for the week. I listened. Measured footsteps crossed the marble foyer, slow, deliberate. A soft thud. Something heavy being set down, the rustle of fabric. His overcoat, probably. I'd learned to identify the sounds of his movements, to anticipate his presence before he entered a room. A survival instinct. Sophia. His voice carried through the penthouse like smoke, dark, intoxicating, and dangerous. I didn't turn around immediately. I couldn't. My body refused to obey, locked in place by a fear I couldn't quite name. Because it wasn't entirely fear, was it? There was something else tangled with it, something I didn't want to acknowledge. I know you're there. Closer now. I in the doorway to the living room. I turned slowly, my silk robe whispering around my legs. He stood framed in the archway, the city lights silhouetting his tall figure. Antonio Russo. My husband in name, only the most feared man in the city. You're back early, I managed, hating how my voice trembled. He stepped into the room, and I caught the subtle scent that always accompanied him, expensive cologne with notes of cedar, and something darker underneath. Like most predators, he moved with an economy of motion, purposeful, controlled. His charcoal suit was immaculate despite the downpour outside. Not a drop of rain on his broad shoulders, not a hair out of place. Change of plans. His eyes, so dark they were almost black, scanned me from head to toe. Expression unreadable. Pack a bag. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. I'm sorry. Pack a bag. Each word precisely enunciated, as if speaking to someone particularly slow. We leave in an hour. My hands instinctively clutched the edges of my robe tighter. Leave? Where? Does it matter? He raised an eyebrow, the ghost of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Not a kind smile, the kind that made my stomach clench. You're my wife. Where I go, you go. But you said. I know what I said. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just inches from me. Close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. Close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. Plans change. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to step back to show weakness before Antonio was to invite disaster. I'd learned that lesson quickly. For how long? I asked, proud that my voice stayed steady this time. That he reached out and I flinched involuntarily. His jaw tightened at my reaction, but he merely tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering against my cheek a moment too long. 2 weeks. Somewhere warm. His eyes never left mine. Consider it a honeymoon. The word hung in the air between us, absurd in its normalcy. Honeymoons were for couples in love, for real marriages, not for business arrangements brokered in desperation. I don't understand, I whispered. His hand dropped from my face and he stepped back, restoring the careful distance he always maintained between us. You don't need to understand. You just need to be ready in an hour. Wear something appropriate for the tropics. And then he was gone, moving back through the penthouse with those measured steps, leaving me trembling by the window. An hour later, I stood in the private elevator that serviced only our floor, a small suitcase at my feet. I'd chosen a simple navy dress with a white cardigan, an outfit that could pass for elegant but unremarkable. The kind that wouldn't draw attention, the kind that said, I am nobody important. Which was the truth, wasn't it? I was nobody, just collateral in a game played by powerful. As the elevator doors slid shut, I caught one last reflection of myself in the mirrored walls. Mrs. Russo, the wife on paper, heading toward a destination she didn't choose and couldn't escape. The private elevator descended in silence, the faint hum of its movement the only sound between me and the unknown. When the doors opened, I stepped into the underground garage, a cathedral of polished steel and concrete, the air faintly scented with gasoline and rain. But the familiar black sedan wasn't waiting. Instead, a gleaming silver Bentley stood at the center of the bay, its metal body reflecting the dim light like liquid mercury. Antonio stood beside it, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapidly in Italian. Behind him loomed Marco, his ever-present shadow. Driver, bodyguard, executioner, and perhaps something darker. I hesitated at the elevator's threshold, suddenly reluctant to step into whatever new chapter of this arrangement was about to unfold. Antonio looked up. His dark eyes met mine and the conversation ended mid-sentence. We're ready, he said into the phone, then slipped it into his pocket. He nodded once, and Marco wordlessly took my suitcase, placing it in the trunk. Where are we going? I asked, my voice barely steady as Antonio opened the car door for me, a mockery of chivalry from a man who had purchased me as surely as he had purchased this vehicle. You'll see when we get there. The interior smelled of leather and his cologne, that blend of cedar and smoke that seemed to fill every room he entered. I slid across the back seat, putting as much distance between us as possible. He noticed. Of course he noticed, and that ghost of a smile, sharp and dangerous, appeared once more. Marco took his place behind the wheel, and the Bentley glided out of the garage into the rainy night. Outside, the city stretched in streaks of neon and shadow, but instead of heading toward the airport as I'd expected, we drove in the opposite direction toward the harbor. We're not flying? I ventured after 20 minutes of tense silence. Antonio, scrolling through messages on his phone, looked up only long enough to answer. No, one word. Cold. Final, that was all I'd get. Raindrops chased each other down the glass as the city faded behind us.my reflection stared back, ghostly and pale, a woman who no longer belonged anywhere. The car slowed as we approached the marina, not the public docks where cruise ships lined up like floating cities, but the private yacht club, where the truly wealthy moored their floating palaces.my stomach tightened. We rolled up to a guarded gate point. 2 men in dark suits stood sentry despite the rain, straightening as our car approached, eyes sharp, alert. Point 1 leaned toward Marco's window. A brief exchange in Italian, and the gate swung open and we proceeded down a long, illuminated dock, lights glowing against the black water. At the end waited a vessel so magnificent it took my breath away. Not a pleasure craft, but a floating mansion, at least 150 feet of white luxury gliding gently against its moorings. That's yours?" I asked before I could stop myself. Antonio's gaze slid to me, amusement flickering in his dark eyes. "Of course it's mine." Before I could respond, the rear door opened. Another man in a suit offered his hand, helping me out into the soft rain. Antonio appeared beside me, his hand finding the small of my back, light, but unmistakably commanding. That touch burned through the thin fabric of my dress as he guided me forward. Men appeared from the shadows, taking our luggage, murmuring respectful greetings, but none looked directly at me. It was as though I were invisible or forbidden. We ascended the gangway, the Vendetta towering above us, its name etched in black script along the hull. Glass doors slid open automatically, revealing an interior that shimmered with gold light and silence. Marble floors, cream leather sofas, and abstract art that probably cost more than my father's entire house. Antonio's hand remained at my back as he guided me through the main salon. "Your stateroom is this way," he said, his tone clipped, impersonal, the perfect businessman giving a tour of his latest acquisition. We descended a curved staircase to a lower deck, the hum of the yacht deepening beneath our feet as the crew prepared to depart. At the end of a carpeted corridor, he stopped before a door and opened it. Soft lighting spilled across a master suite fit for royalty, a king-sized bed, pristine white linens, panoramic windows that would show the sea by morning. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, finally removing his hand from my back. "We sail in 30 minutes. I stood in the doorway, taking it all in, the luxury, the isolation, the quiet. "And where will you be staying?" I asked, the edge in my voice sharper than intended. That smile again, faint, knowing, dangerous. "This is the master suite, Sophia. My quarters are through there." He gestured to a connecting door on the far wall I hadn't noticed before. My heart stumbled. "But you said on our wedding night." "I know what I said." He stepped closer, that scent wrapping around me like a spell, cedar, spice, and power. "As I told you earlier, plans change." I backed up until my knees hit the bed's edge. "What does that mean exactly?" Antonio's fingers caught my chin, tilting my face upward. His touch was surprisingly gentle, at odds with the intensity in his gaze. "It means, my paper wife, that perhaps it's time we rewrote the terms of our arrangement." He released me, straightening the cuffs of his shirt with meticulous precision. "Rest. We have a long journey ahead." Then he turned and left, the door closing softly behind him, leaving me alone with the gentle hum of engines and the thunder of my pulse. I sank onto the bed, my legs trembling beneath me. What had I gotten myself into? 2 weeks at sea, trapped with the man who had once told me I was nothing more than a name on paper. But his last words echoed in my mind, dark and intimate. Plans change. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was more afraid of him crossing those lines, or of how much I wanted him to. Sleep evaded me that night, chased away by the hum of the yacht and the knowledge that Antonio Russo slept just beyond that connecting door. When dawn finally came, pale light spilled through the blinds, softening the sharp edges of the Vendetta's luxury. A soft knock. "Mrs. Russo." A woman's voice accented, deferential. I sat up, disoriented, my hair tumbling around my shoulders. "Yes." The door opened to reveal a petite woman in a crisp uniform. "Good morning. I'm Elena, the chief stewardess. Mr. Russo asked me to assist you with anything you might need during the voyage." I pulled the sheets higher, suddenly conscious of how vulnerable I looked. "What time is it?" "Just past 9, ma'am. We've been at sea for approximately 6 hours. Elena moved gracefully around the room, opening the blinds. The view beyond stole my breath, endless blue, horizon stretching forever. Breakfast is served on the aft deck whenever you're ready. I've laid out some options in the wardrobe for today." She gestured toward a tall wardrobe I hadn't noticed the night before. "Mr. Russo mentioned you packed hastily." The slight pause said everything. My modest suitcase, a navy dress, a cardigan suddenly felt like a cruel joke amid all this refinement. "Thank you," I managed, determined not to show how out of place I felt. "I'll be up shortly." When she left, I rose and crossed the plush carpet to the wardrobe. Inside hung a dozen outfits, all in my size. All designer sundresses, silk blouses, flowing pants, even swimsuits, every color soft and feminine. He had planned this. Every detail. Antonio Russo didn't do impulsive. 20 minutes later, I emerged in a simple emerald one-piece swimsuit and a white cover-up, my hair braided neatly. The bathroom gleamed with marble and glass, sunlight glancing off the fixtures as I took one last steadying breath before climbing the staircase to the main deck. The Vendetta was even more breathtaking in daylight, gleaming teak, chrome railings, the scent of sea air and salt. Crew members moved silently, polished efficiency in motion. I followed the smell of coffee to the aft deck. There, beneath a white canopy, a table had been set for 2 fruit, pastries, silver coffee service glinting in the sun. Antonio stood by the railing, linen trousers, white shirt sleeves rolled up, gaze fixed on the horizon. "You slept well." Not quite a question, more a habit. "Not particularly." That almost smile touched his lips. "The sea takes some getting used to." He gestured to the table. "Sit. Eat." I took the chair farthest from him. Even here, surrounded by nothing but ocean, he positioned himself with his back to the wall. The man never stopped calculating. A steward appeared, poured coffee, then vanished. Silence, broken only by the rhythmic whisper of waves. "Are you going to tell me where we're going?" Antonio lifted his cup, eyes steady on me. "Antigua. My private island just off the coast, to be precise." I nearly choked. "You have a private island?" "Among other properties." He set the cup down, perfectly precise. "We'll arrive late tomorrow." The casual way he said it unnerved me. His power was staggering and I was adrift in it. "Why?" The word slipped out before I could stop it. "Why this sudden honeymoon? Why the change in our arrangement?" His eyes, dark, bottomless, met mine. "Circumstances have evolved. Certain business associates needed convincing of our marriage's legitimacy." My heart sank. Of course. A show. A performance. "So I'm to play the adoring wife for your associates?" "No." His voice hardened, cutting through the sea breeze. "My island is private. We'll be alone there, apart from the staff. This isn't about appearances, Sophia." The way he said my name sent a shiver down my spine. "Then what is it about?" He leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, gaze never leaving mine. "Perhaps I simply decided it was time to claim what's mine." The words fell between us, heavy as the ocean itself. My pulse quickened. Fear. Anger. Want. I couldn't tell which burned stronger. "I'm not yours," I whispered, though even I heard the hollow ring of denial, because on paper I was his wife. His possession. Antonio's expression didn't change, but something flickered, deep and dangerous, behind his eyes. "Finish your breakfast," he said at last. "Then Elena will show you around the yacht. I have business to attend to." He rose in one fluid motion, the morning light tracing the sharp line of his jaw. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with the endless sea, the untouched fruit, and the echo of his claim. "What's mine?" By the time the Vendetta reached the island, the sun was beginning to set bleeding gold and crimson across the water from the deck. I saw it rise from the sea like something unreal. A private paradise carved out of jungle and rock. Palm trees lined a stretch of white sand. Further inland, a villa of glass and stone gleamed against the fading sky. Antonio stood beside me at the railing, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of amber liquid that caught the sunset light. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "Welcome to Antigua. Home for now. Home." The words sounded strange coming from his lips, like something fragile that didn't belong in his world. "You own all this?" I asked quietly. "Every inch." Of course he did. The yacht anchored just offshore, and a smaller boat ferried us across the shallows. Security men were already waiting on the dock, silent, efficient, their eyes everywhere but on me. The villa loomed ahead, its wide doors opening into a space that smelled of salt, polished wood, and money. The air conditioning whispered against my skin as I stepped inside. Marble floors, sweeping windows, art that looked abstract and expensive. Every surface gleamed, but not a single trace of warmth. Antonio moved through it like a man who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. "This is where we'll be staying. You'll find your room upstairs to the left of mine." "Separate rooms?" He turned to me then, his gaze sharp, unreadable. "For now." The words hung in the air between us, charged with everything unspoken. Elena appeared with a tray of drinks, her expression calm, professional. "Dinner will be served on the terrace in an hour, Mr. Russo." He nodded, dismissing her. "You should rest," he said to me, his tone softening by a fraction. "You look tired." "I'm fine," I lied. He studied me for a long moment, as if deciding whether to press. Then he simply said, "Suit yourself," and disappeared down the hall. Later, as twilight deepened, I wandered out onto the terrace. Lanterns flickered along the edges of the infinity pool that overlooked the ocean. The water reflected the bruised colors of the sky, violet, indigo, silver. It was so beautiful it almost hurt. I found him there, sitting by the pool's edge, sleeves rolled up, the faint light casting his features in sharp relief. The gunmetal glint of a wristwatch caught my eye, time ticking. In a world that didn't seem real. "You don't sleep much, do you?" I asked quietly. He didn't look at me. "Sleep is for men who feel safe." There was a pause, the waves whispering below. "Do you ever feel safe?" His eyes met mine then, and in them for the first time I saw not just power but weariness. "Not anymore." I stepped closer, the silk of my robe brushing against my legs. "Then why bring me here?" His voice was low, deliberate. "Because there are things I haven't asked you. Things I should have." "Like what?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood, closing the distance between us in one smooth motion. The air seemed to thicken. "Do you regret marrying me?" My breath caught. "You mean, do I regret saving my family?" "That's not what I asked." I swallowed. "Yes. No. I don't know." He nodded slowly, as though that answer pleased him. Then quietly, "You could be my weakness, Sophia. If I allowed it." Something in me trembled. "And if I don't want to be your weakness?" His gaze darkened. "Then don't be. Be my equal instead." For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between us, the whisper of the wind, the heat of his nearness, the reflection of firelight in his eyes. And then he kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision of anger, fear, desire. Everything we'd both been denying since that night at the courthouse. The water shimmered behind us, catching the reflection of our shadows as we sank against the cool stone at the pool's edge. When it was over, I could still taste salt on his lips, sea, sweat, and something darker. He rested his forehead against mine, breath uneven. "I brought you here because I was tired of denying what's mine." His confession landed like a heartbeat, both terrifying and inevitable, because even as my pulse thundered, some part of me already knew I wouldn't walk away. He stood then, pulling me gently to my feet, fingers tracing the line of my jaw. "There's something you should see," he said quietly. He led me inside. down a narrow hallway that opened into a room filled with screens, a surveillance hub humming softly in the dim light. "What is this?" "Insurance," he replied. He tapped a key, and one of the monitors flickered to life, showing grainy footage of a man in a hospital parking lot. The timestamp recent. My stomach dropped. It was the rehab center where my father was staying. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I need you to understand the kind of world you married into." He zoomed in on the image. Two figures emerged, one of them unmistakably armed. A tall man in a black coat, his face half lit by the street lamp. "Who is that?" "Alexander Volkov," he said, voice flat, emotionless. "He's the reason I brought you here. He thinks you're leverage." My heart lurched. "Leverage? Against you?" "Yes." He turned to face me. "You are my weakness, whether I like it or not. And in our world, weakness gets you killed." The screen reflected in his eyes blue light, cold and merciless. I took a step back, my voice trembling. "So I'm just a liability?" "No," he said, closing the distance between us again. "You're the one thing I can't afford to lose." For the first time since I met him, Antonio Russo didn't look like the man who controlled everything. He looked like someone fighting a war he couldn't win. His voice was low, deliberate. "Because there are things I haven't asked you. Things I should have." "Like what?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood, closing the distance between us in one smooth motion. The air seemed to thicken. "Do you regret marrying me?" My breath caught. "You mean, do I regret saving my family?" "That's not what I asked." I swallowed. "Yes. No. I don't know." He nodded slowly, as though that answer pleased him. Then quietly, "You could be my weakness, Sophia. If I allowed it." Something in me trembled. "And if I don't want to be your weakness?" His gaze darkened. "Then don't be. Be my equal instead." For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between us, the whisper of the wind, the heat of his nearness, the reflection of firelight in his eyes. And then he kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision of anger, fear, desire. Everything we'd both been denying since that night at the courthouse. The water shimmered behind us, catching the reflection of our shadows as we sank against the cool stone at the pool's edge. When it was over, I could still taste salt on his lips, see sweat, and something darker. He rested his forehead against mine, breath uneven. "I brought you here because I was tired of denying what's mine." His confession landed like a heartbeat, both terrifying and inevitable, because even as my pulse thundered, some part of me already knew I wouldn't walk away. He stood then, pulling me gently to my feet, fingers tracing the line of my jaw. "There's something you should see," he said quietly. He led me inside, down a narrow hallway that opened into a room filled with screens, a surveillance hub humming softly in the dim light. "What is this?" "Insurance," he replied. He tapped a key, and one of the monitors flickered to life, showing that night, the island slept under a moonless sky. The waves were calmer than usual, too calm. The kind of silence that warned of danger long before it arrived. Antonio had left earlier that evening. He said there were matters he needed to handle personally. His absence pressed against the villa like an invisible weight. Even Elena seemed tense, her usual calm replaced by clipped answers and quick glances toward the windows. I tried to distract myself by reading in the bedroom, but the words blurred. My thoughts circled the same truth Antonio had shown me. Volkov, the man who hunted him. The man who knew I existed. Sometime after midnight, the power flickered. Once. Twice. Then darkness swallowed the villa whole. "Elena!" I called out, but my voice died in the still air. Then came it, the faint crunch of gravel outside, footsteps. More than one. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to move, but my body refused. A distant sound, the sharp pop of a suppressed gunshot. Glass shattered somewhere below. They were here. Adrenaline snapped me into motion. I snatched the phone from the nightstand. No signal. Antonio's men were gone, or worse. The door handle turned. I bolted for the bathroom, locking the door just as a shadow darkened the crack beneath it. She's upstairs. A man's voice. Russian. My breath came fast and shallow. I scanned the marble room. Tiny window above the tub. Barely large enough. Another crash outside. Then the metallic scream of hinges. The bathroom door shook under a heavy kick. Once. Twice. Panic clawed at my throat. I climbed onto the counter, gripping the window frame. Come on, come on. The next kick splintered wood. I hauled myself through, scraping my hands against the frame, and dropped onto the gravel roof below. The humid air hit me like a wall. Jungle sounds distant. Foreign rose around the villa. I crouched low, heart hammering behind me. The bathroom door finally gave way. Where is she? I didn't wait to find out. Barefoot, I ran across the roof, the rough tiles biting into my soles ahead. A narrow maintenance ladder clung to the wall. I climbed down, breath ragged, until my feet hit the sand. Voices shouted in the distance. A flashlight beam swept across the trees. I ducked behind a row of palms, then sprinted toward the tree line. Branches tore at my skin as I plunged into the jungle. Every sound was too loud. The slap of my feet, the rasp of my breath. I stumbled on a root and fell hard, catching myself against the damp earth. Somewhere behind me, men cursed in Russian. She went this way. I crawled through the undergrowth. Mud slicked beneath my hands, until the ground dropped away. A cliff. Below, the faint glimmer of a waterfall spilled into darkness. There was nowhere else to go. Don't move! The shout came from behind, followed by the metallic click of a safety being released. I turned slowly. 3 men stood in a semicircle, guns trained on me. The one in front, the leader, smiled thinly. Mrs. Russo. My boss has been dying to meet you. The world tilted. My pulse thundered in my ears as they bound my wrists, forcing me toward the waiting boat hidden beyond the rocks. When I came to, my wrists burned from the restraints, the steady thrum of engines filling the air, the smell of salt and diesel. We were back at sea. A man sat across from me, his suit immaculate despite the chaos of the night, silver hair slicked back, cold blue eyes. You must be wondering who I am. Volkov, I said hoarsely. He smiled. So he talks about me. I'm flattered. I glared at him, though my body trembled. What do you want? What everyone wants, Mrs. Russo. Power. And to take from Antonio what he values most. He leaned forward, voice like velvet over glass. He thinks he can build an empire without paying for his sins. I intend to remind him how the world works. You're using me, I said quietly. Smart girl. He poured himself a drink, amber liquid swirling in the glass. Tell me something, Sophia. Do you really know the man you married? Or did you just sign where he told you to? I bit my tongue, refusing to answer. He's not the hero you think. He's a killer. And if you stay by his side, you'll die for it. I'm already dying, I whispered, surprising both of us. His brow lifted slightly. So brave. Or maybe so naive. He stood, walking toward the window. Beyond him, the horizon began to pale, the first light of dawn breaking over the Caribbean. I could let you go, you know, he said softly. A new name. A quiet life. No more danger. All you have to do is tell me where Antonio keeps his records. I met his gaze. I don't know anything. You will. He turned to one of his men. Make sure our guest is comfortable. The door closed behind him with a metallic thud, leaving me alone in the cabin, alone with the ache of fear and the faint hope that Antonio Russo was still alive. Any footage of a man in a hospital parking lot, The timestamp recent my stomach dropped. It was the rehab center where my father was staying. Why are you showing me this? Because I need you to understand the kind of world you married into. He zoomed in on the image. Two figures emerged, one of them unmistakably armed. A tall man in a black coat, his face half lit by the street lamp. Who is that? Alexander Volkov, he said, voice flat, emotionless. He's the reason I brought you here. He thinks you're leverage. My heart lurched. Leverage? Against you? Yes. He turned to face me. You are my weakness, whether I like it or not. And in our world, weakness gets you killed. The screen reflected in his eyes blue light, cold and merciless. I took a step back, my voice trembling. So I'm just a liability? No, he said, closing the distance between us again. You're the one thing I can't afford to lose. For the first time since I met him, Antonio Russo didn't look like the man who controlled everything. He looked like someone fighting a war he couldn't win. Time lost all meaning aboard Volkov's yacht. The gentle hum of the engines, the soft roll of the waves, it was the sound of captivity. I sat on the leather sofa, wrists sore from the restraints, my sundress torn, bare feet leaving faint marks on the pristine carpet. Then the door opened and he entered, tall, lean, dark hair streaked with silver. A white suit that should have looked absurd in the tropics, but instead made him seem untouchable. Alexander Volkov. I knew it before he spoke. Mrs. Russo, he greeted, voice smooth and cultured. I apologize for the manner in which you were brought here. My men can be overzealous. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquor, extending one to me. Drink. You look like you need it. I prefer not to be poisoned. Thank you. Volkov laughed, no warmth in the sound. If I wanted you dead, my dear, you'd never have left the island. He took a sip from the glass he'd offered, then set it on the table. See? Perfectly safe. I didn't touch it. My voice came out steady. Why am I here? What do you want from me? He studied me, pale eyes sharp with calculation. Fascinating, he murmured. I can see why he's obsessed with you. There's a fire beneath the fear. What do you want? I repeated. He smiled faintly. Simple. The return of what your husband stole from me. And what was that? A flash drive, Volkov said, his tone hardening. Information that could be problematic for my operations. Information Antonio somehow acquired and is now using to dismantle my business, piece by piece. I know nothing about any flash drive. I believe you, he said softly, but Antonio will trade it for you. Of that I'm certain. How can you be so sure? His eyes glinted. Because I've been watching him watch you. The great Antonio Russo, who's never shown weakness for anyone, looking at you like a starving man at a feast he can't touch. Until your little honeymoon, of course. Heat rose to my face. Volkov's gaze sharpened. You're his weakness, Mrs. Russo. His only weakness. And in our world, weakness gets you killed. Are you threatening me? Not at all. I'm offering you an opportunity. He leaned closer, voice low, almost intimate. Antonio Russo is not a man capable of love. He sees you as a possession, a trophy his pride demands he protect. But once you've served your purpose, he'll tire of you, turn you from asset to liability. You're asking me to betray him, I said flatly. I'm offering you a choice, he countered. More than he ever gave you. The words hit their mark, but I remembered Antonio's eyes on the terrace, the way his voice had broken when he said, You're the one thing I can't afford to lose. No, I said, firm. Whatever game you're playing, I won't be part of it. Volkov's mask slipped, the charm drained from his expression. A pity. You have until morning to reconsider. By then, Antonio will have received my terms. His response will tell you everything you need to know about your true value. He left. The door locked behind him. I sat in silence, the steady sway of the yacht beneath me, the faint echo of his words circling in my mind, your true value. Morning came in a blur of light and dread. A younger man entered, avoiding my gaze. Mrs. Russo, Mr. Volkov requests your presence on deck. What's happening? Your husband has responded to Mr. Volkov's terms. The words sent my pulse racing. Volkov was waiting when I stepped onto the deck. He looked perfectly composed, a predator in sunlight. He gestured toward the horizon. Look! There, cutting across the blue expanse, was a sleek dark shape I would have recognized anywhere. The Vendetta. Antonio's yacht. He's agreed to the exchange, Volkov said smoothly. The flash drive for you. Simple, civilized commerce between gentlemen. But the danger beneath his tone was unmistakable. When? Within the hour. Enough time for you to make yourself presentable. He nodded to someone behind me. I turned and froze. Elena. Antonio's chief stewardess appeared at my side, calm, professional as ever, but her eyes flickered with something else, resolve. She led me below deck. I in the guest cabin. Fresh clothes awaited, a simple white dress. My wrists were bandaged. My hair brushed until it gleamed as she worked. She whispered under the hum of the shower she'd turned on to mask our voices. Mr. Russo sent me. As a precaution. He has a plan? Yes. When the time comes, stay close to me. No further explanation, only that single thread of hope. An hour later, I stood beside Volkov at the rail as the two yachts floated side by side, waves slapping against their hulls like the ticking of a countdown. Antonio stood on the Vendetta's deck, dark suit immaculate, face carved from fury and restraint. Even from this distance, I felt his gaze like a touch. Shall we begin? Volkov called. Antonio's voice carried back, steady, cold. The drive first. Then Sophia. Volkov laughed. I think not. The woman first. Once I've verified she's unharmed, then you'll have your toy. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Antonio nodded once. Very well. Send her over. A narrow gangway unfolded, bridging the space between the two worlds, the man who owned me by contract, and the man who sought to own me by conquest. Volkov's hand clamped around my arm, his grip iron. Remember our conversation? He murmured against my ear. This is your last chance to choose the winning side. I met his gaze with quiet defiance. I already have. He shoved me forward. Elena appeared beside me, steadying my balance as we stepped onto the swaying bridge. Halfway across, the sea churned below, a dark chasm between danger and salvation, then chaos. A roar split the air. A helicopter, black and unmarked, descended from the sky. Wind whipped the deck, sending waves crashing against both yachts. Men in tactical gear dropped from ropes. Antonio's men. Gunfire erupted, the crack of bullets tearing through morning calm. Now! Elena shouted, pushing me down. I flattened against the gangway as splinters flew. The bridge rocked violently through the chaos. I saw him, Antonio, vaulting over the railing of the Vendetta, landing on the narrow bridge with impossible precision. Sophia! He shouted over the din, come to me now. I stumbled to my feet, clutching the rail. 10 feet. 5. Our eyes locked, his dark, mine wide with terror and relief. Then a single shot. The world tilted, fire seared through my shoulder. The gangway lurched. I fell. Antonio! The sea swallowed my cry. Cold. Endless. The white dress tangled around me like a shroud. I kicked, but the current dragged me down. Light dimmed. Sound vanished, and then strong arms around me, hauling me upward. We broke the surface, both gasping. Hold on to me. Antonio's voice was raw, desperate. Don't let go. I clung to him as he swam, powerful strokes cutting through the waves. Hands reached down from above, pulling us back onto the Vendetta's deck amid smoke, chaos, and shouted orders. He cradled me against his chest, scanning my wound. "You're shot," he growled. "Just a graze," I managed. "Antonio, what, later?" He cut in, lifting me effortlessly. "We're leaving." Behind us, the helicopter still thundered overhead. Antonio's men securing Volkov's crew. He carried me toward the waiting chopper. I caught one last glimpse of Volkov, blood on his temple, held at gunpoint by Marco. "The flash drive." "There was no flash drive," Antonio said as he lifted me inside. "Only you. It was always only about you." The engines roared, the world fell away beneath us. The helicopter blades beat against the dawn, a deafening rhythm that blurred sea and sky together. Salt clung to my skin, blood soaked through the thin fabric of my dress, but all I could see was him, Antonio, beside me, his arm wrapped protectively around my shoulders below. Volkov's yacht burned in the pale light of morning, smoke curling into the endless blue. "Where are we going?" I whispered, my voice lost beneath the roar. He leaned closer, lips near my ear. "Home," he said softly. "Our real home. Where no one will ever touch you again." Hours blurred together, flight, then silence, then the hum of tires on a winding road. When the car finally stopped, night had fallen again. Outside the window stretched mountains cloaked in mist. Antonio opened the door, and cold air swept in sharp, clean, nothing like the sea. Ahead stood a mansion built into the cliffs, stone and glass concealed by forest and shadow. "You never told me about this place," I said. "No one knows about this place," he replied. "It's my contingency for scenarios exactly like this one." The doors opened soundlessly. Inside waited a doctor, efficient and wordless, already setting up instruments. "Sit," Antonio ordered. The pain in my shoulder flared as the doctor worked, cleaning and stitching the wound. Antonio never left my side. He said nothing, but his hand hovered close, steady even when mine trembled. "It's a deep graze," the doctor finally said. "Missed the artery by millimeters. She'll recover." When the man left, the silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the low crackle of a distant fire. Later, in a bedroom larger than my old apartment, I sat on the edge of the bed wrapped in a silk robe, bandaged and exhausted. Antonio stood by the window, his broad frame outlined against the silver-blue glow of moonlight. "What happens now?" I asked. He turned, eyes unreadable. "That depends on you, Sophia." He crossed the room in slow, deliberate steps, stopping when he was just close enough that I could feel the heat of him. "You've seen what my life truly is," he said. "The danger, the violence, the enemies who will always look for ways to hurt me." He knelt, then, emotion that felt impossible for a man like Antonio Russo, his hands closing gently around mine. "I wouldn't blame you for wanting out, for taking your family and disappearing somewhere safe, far from me, far from this world." I stared at him, stunned by the words. "You would let me go?" Pain flickered through his expression, so brief it almost wasn't there. "I would die 1,000 deaths every day without you," he said quietly. "But yes, if that's what you want, I would let you go." His gaze held mine, fierce and unguarded. "Your freedom for your heart. That's the only trade I'm interested in now." The room seemed to dissolve around us, the mountain walls, the firelight, the night itself. All that remained was the man who had once bought me like a possession, now offering me something I'd never expected. A choice, and somewhere deep inside, I realized that choice had already been made. Maybe it had been made the day he found me in that hospital corridor years ago, reading to my unconscious father in a torn blue sweater. Maybe it had been sealed with every glance, every touch. We'd pretended didn't mean anything. "What if I don't want to go?" I whispered. "What if I want to stay, to be your wife, not just on paper but in every way that matters?" Something broke open in his expression: relief, disbelief, and something dangerously close to joy. He rose, cupping my face in his hands, his voice rough. Then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that choice. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. Protecting you. Cherishing you. His voice dropped to a whisper. Loving you as you deserve to be loved. My fingers traced the line of his jaw, the curve of a mouth that, for once, wasn't twisted into that dangerous, almost smile. I choose you, I said softly. That he drew in a sharp breath, then pulled me into his arms, careful of my wound, as if I were something sacred. His kiss was nothing like the ones before. It wasn't possession. It wasn't dominance. It was surrender. A vow. When we finally broke apart, the night outside was utterly still. No more paper marriage, he murmured, his voice low against my ear. From now on, every vow between us is written in blood and bone and breath. I pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath my palm. And heart? I whispered. He smiled, then real unguarded. And heart? He agreed. Perhaps he had never said that word before. Perhaps neither of us truly had, but as he drew me close, the mountain winds whispered against the glass, carrying our promise into the dark. A vow forged not in contract or convenience, but in something raw, terrifying, and completely real. Morning broke over the mountains, soft and pale, spilling gold across the glass walls of the hideaway. For the first time in weeks, there was no gunfire, no running, no fear, only the quiet rhythm of waves echoing far below the cliffs. Sophia woke to the sound of silence and the faint scent of coffee drifting through the open doorway. Her shoulder still ached beneath the bandage, but it was a distant pain, the kind that reminded her she was still alive. Antonio sat on the terrace, half turned toward the sunrise. His suit jacket hung over the chair, sleeves rolled up, the scars along his forearm catching the light like faint silver lines, proof that even power could bleed. He didn't look up when she joined him. You should be resting, he said quietly. I've done enough of that, she replied. She stood beside him, watching the mist roll down the mountains. The world felt impossibly still, as if holding its breath after the storm. She studied his profile, the man who once commanded empires now sitting quietly beside her, coffee cooling in his hands. What happens to us now? She asked softly. He turned to her then, and for the first time there was no mask in his eyes. Now we live with what we've chosen. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they had survived: the lies, the contracts, the fire, the sea. Sophia reached for his hand. It was warm, rough, alive. The kind of hand that had built and destroyed in equal measure and now, finally, could hold without breaking. No more running, she whispered. No more running, he echoed. They sat in silence for a long time. The world outside the glass slowly came to life: wind in the trees, the low hum of engines somewhere below, the pulse of a life they had fought too hard to earn. And then Antonio rose, pulling her gently to her feet. Come with me, he said. He led her down a narrow path to a small stone chapel built into the cliffside, abandoned, half forgotten. The door creaked open, revealing a single wooden cross and shafts of light piercing through cracks in the roof. From his pocket, Antonio drew out something small, the platinum ring that had once bound them in a courthouse with no witnesses and no vows. He placed it in her hand. This time, he said, we write our own terms. She smiled faintly through tears. No signatures. No lawyers. Just us. He slipped the ring back onto her finger, the sunlight catching on the metal, no longer cold, no longer a symbol of debt but of choice. Every vow from now on, he murmured, is written in blood and in heart. Sophia looked up at him, the man who had once been her captor, now the only place she could ever be free outside. The wind carried the sound of the sea against the cliffs, steady and unending, like a promise that some things, once rewritten, could never be undone. My favorite part was when Antonio finally said, no more paper marriage. proving he wasn't just a mafia boss but a man capable of love, redemption, and sacrifice. What was your favorite moment of truth or love in their story? Drop it in the comments below. I'd love to know what moved you most. Don't miss more powerful tales of passion, danger, and devotion. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss the next story from Desire Tales.